I think that, the previous couple of generations, the car and the suburbs have kind of been this idea of freedom. But now looking at the newer generation, our idea of freedom is, if we have good transit service, we can get wherever we need to be without being tied to a car.
That's Sarosh Irani. He's our guest today and was recently featured in the national publication Streetsblog for his research at Wayne State University to improve Detroit's bus system. For instance, just by moving the shelters to where people actually need them, not building new ones, 8 times more people could have access to bus shelters. And that matters because weather in Detroit, well, as you know, it can be a real thing to deal with. I'm Jer Stays.
And I'm Cheyenne Nosarini. Welcome to Your Daily Detroit for Tuesday, July 2nd, 2019. We'll have that conversation and share a couple other stories from around town right after this.
Daily Detroit is brought to you in part by Repurpose. That's where you can get hired by Detroit's best startups and companies. Repurpose connects top talent like you with purpose-driven companies based on values, experience, and culture fit. Join their talent community at repurpose.co. That's repurpose.co. Joining me in the beautiful Detroit Shipping Company studios of Podcast Detroit, Sarosh Irani. Brought him by because I love to talk to people who are doing things on the ground in very practical ways to help Detroit be a better place. And whether it's through acts of good work or through looking at smarter ways to make things happen, I always appreciate that. Sarosh, welcome to Daily Detroit.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So the first thing that caught my eye, I mean, I've seen you on Twitter and things like that, but the thing that really caught my eye recently is you got featured by Streetsblog in regards to bus shelter placement. And this might seem like a minor thing, but why does it matter where the bus shelters go?
So bus shelters and bus stops in general are really important aspects of any transit system and therefore important aspects of any city. The bus shelters that we looked at, we just realized that a lot of times bus shelters aren't placed where they need to be, in that people will be waiting at bus stops without shelters, so they'll be exposed to the elements, the wind, the rain, the snow. It gets pretty cold in Detroit. And so we realized that the bus shelters are placed not as much where they need to be. And so we looked at how can we better distribute the bus shelters throughout the city in a more equitable fashion, so that kind of we increase the number of people who see the benefit of bus shelters.
So to give people an idea, I know we're the motor city, but there's a lot of bus usage, isn't there here?
So I think a couple of years ago, the University of Michigan came out with a study where they found that over 26% of households in the motor city don't have reliable access to a car. So that really brings the transit system into focus because, if that many people don't have access to a car, the bus system is the next best way to get around.
Well, and if you think about households that are maybe sharing a car too, so maybe they have access to a car, but there's only one car amongst 4 people or something like that.
Exactly. So the bus system, even in the motor city, is really important. And DDOT does a great job of serving Detroiters with the limited resources they have. So and public transit always provides an economic benefit to any city. It provides more options to people to get around. For example, like I took the bus down here today. I don't own a car. I could have walked. I could have taken the Q line. I could have biked. But for me, the bus was just the most effective way to get down here. So that's the route I chose.
People might be surprised to see that you live in the motor city without a car. This is going to sound like a pedestrian question. I know a little bit of the answer because I've done it before. But how is it living in the motor city without a car?
It is a bit of a challenge. Definitely if I did own a car, there would be less thought involved in my trips. I'll often plan trips around the bus schedule, or I'll plan trips to places that, I know bus route goes to. So for me, for example, if I have to go grocery shopping, I'm going to Eastern Market on the weekends, I'll usually bike there because there's no direct bus route from Wayne State to Eastern Market, so I'll have to take a transfer. So in that regard, usually biking is the quickest way. But then if I'm getting downtown, I have a couple bus options to get there. I can always take the Q line. And then, if I'm going out to Southwest, I'll just have to plan my trip and make sure that if there's any transfer that I can make that transfer in order to make the trip work well. So it is definitely a challenge being in the motor city without a car, but I've been able to make it work so far, and it's nothing too major.
So things like groceries and stuff, you're able to do all that?
Yeah, definitely. And I also commute from Farmington Hills. So there's a bus that gets me there too. In that regard, I also have that option. So most things I'm able to do without the bus, without the car. Sorry.
How important is it that there is service in the suburbs? I know that it's kind of been a political football to cut transit funding in Lansing with the roads deal and all that other stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of people say, well, we can't afford transit because we need to fix our roads. But I think a lot of studies show that transit actually takes people off the roads and lowers the wear and tear and all that kind of stuff. But do you see the same kind of need in the suburbs for transit as you do in the city?
I definitely do. I mean, there was, in Cranes, Detroit, there's recently been articles about, people who literally have jobs in Novi and say they're from Detroit. They literally have to get off the bus at the border of Farmington Hills and Novi because Novi is a smart opt-out community. So they're literally, the bus is not allowed to run in the Novi city limits. So people will get off the bus and have to walk or bike a couple miles to their jobs. So it's all about connectivity, right? So if people, if there's certain cities that don't opt into smart, like that's just like a Swiss cheese system where there will be holes and people can't get to where they need to go. In the suburbs, like a lot of people own cars, the vast majority. So there is kind of the perception that, if everybody has cars, everybody can just drive. But, part of the reason that our roads are so bad is because they're heavily used. And with public transit, if we can decrease the use of cars, have less cars on the road, that will be another factor that will help bring down the costs necessary to keep our roads in tip-top shape.
Yeah. It strikes me because we've had so many attempts at making regional transit happen that really haven't happened, to be honest. What is your feeling long term on things? So you're a younger guy. You are still attending Wayne State University. You did really interesting research work around these bus shelters. It's something that there's a lot of lean in here where I'm going, shouldn't they have kind of figured some of this stuff out themselves? Like where to optimally put bus shelters.
Right.
I think in the Streetsblog post they talked about how they were still left over from before a service change like years ago. Is that the case?
So DDOT service was cut, I believe around 2008 because of, the financial crisis. So the bus shelters, to be honest, like DDOT has a lot on its plate and they have relatively limited resources. So for DDOT, a lot of the emphasis has been on getting good service, making sure the buses run on time, making sure the buses get where they need to be, reducing crime on buses. So bus shelters and bus stops haven't been as much of a priority, understandably, because they have, other things going on. So this was kind of, I just saw it as, an inefficiency in the system. And I'm like, hey, I know a professor who's really interested in this. Maybe we can help out. So it was just a cool way that, we got to kind of study the system, kind of, make a recommendation. But props to DDOT. They've recently turned things around. I've seen a definite improvement in the bus system in recent years. Ever since I started at Wayne State, I've seen like a noticeable increase in service. The buses, for me at least, run on time a little bit more often. So props to them. They've done an amazing job. But this was just something we thought that, we could suggest to help DDOT make the system a little bit better.
Well, as part of the greater conversation, one of the things that keeps coming up when I talk to employers or other regional leaders that are pro-transit is that younger talent, people who are desirable to keep in the region to hire for jobs, they want things like transit.
Definitely.
Sounds like you're the kind of guy that's going right into that mix. What is your opinion of that theory, and does that matter? And is that going to affect whether or not you stay in Detroit?
Well, okay, in my opinion of that theory is it's really accurate. Personally, at least, I have like no intention, like zero intention of ever owning a car. And that's something my parents are like, what? Like, they don't understand that. But since they're from a different generation, it's understandable. But for me, and even talking to my friends, a lot of the time, if they don't have to have a car, they don't mind it. I think that, the previous couple of generations, the car and the suburbs have kind of been this idea of freedom. But now looking at the newer generation, our idea of freedom is, if we have good transit service, we can get wherever we need to be without being tied to a car. So for that, I definitely think that theory holds a lot of weight. And, the numbers back it up. Different cities that, maybe the parents left to go to the suburbs, the kids are moving back into the city. So it definitely makes a lot of sense. And for me, definitely transit is something I'll look into. I'm really interested in staying in Metro Detroit and specifically the city of Detroit long term. I know I'm pretty sure this is where I want to be. But transit will definitely make that a more attractive proposition. for me and for other people of my generation.
One of the things I've learned, though, is that people pay for and money mysteriously appears for things that people actually want, right? And it has been difficult to move the regional conversation towards transit. I mean, you can look at our Facebook comments. We have some people who are very supportive of transit, but then a lot of folks are going, you'll pry my car from my cold, dead hands.
Right.
How do you kind of change that? Or do you think that's generational? Do you think that over time this is inexorable, that this pro-transit thing is going to happen? Where do you think Detroit sits on that? And what do you think could be done to kind of, I don't know, I hate to say make the bus sexy, but make the bus sexy?
I think, first of all, the Facebook comments, like I totally feel you on that. Sometimes I'm like, I don't even know if I want to open those comments.
A reader and a listener,
yes,
so you're familiar.
Yeah, I've seen those comments. But for me, like making the bus sexy is something that definitely can be done. Other countries and other cities do it particularly well. I think the biggest thing is, if you, like there's an old adage, if you build it, they'll come. If you have a good transit service, and if you make sure the buses are clean, make sure the buses run on time, if you make sure that riding the bus isn't a chore, it's really beneficial, and you'll definitely see an increase in ridership. So other cities have seen, like, if you add bus shelters, make the bus waiting experience better, if you add charging ports or like real-time arrival screens to the bus stops, if you improve the app, if you improve like the payment system, all of that, just if you lower the barrier to entry where it's really easy for me to just get on the bus and go, and I don't have to think too much about it, I don't have to, plan my day around it, that'll just make the system more attractive to everyone. I think it is generational. I think that, public transit is definitely better for the environment than driving your own car. It's better for the roads. In the long run, it's better for your pocketbook. I spend maybe $300 like the whole year on public transit passes. And that gets me everywhere I need to go. But if I wanted to buy a car, there's so many costs involved with that.
Well, and car insurance too,
especially
in the city. I mean, I've written about where my car insurance rate, is nearly $500 a month,
right?
With high insurance. I looked at those. One of the routes that's done very well with signage and things. Have you seen those new bus stations up in Ferndale at 9 Mile with the e-ink displays and the USB chargers? It seems to me like this doesn't seem like a heavy footprint thing,
right?
But something that could be done really well. In fact, that bus station was actually made here in Detroit. We have a bus station maker.
Wow. See,
in
I didn't
Madison
even know that.
Heights. Wow. That I'm hoping to have on the show.
That would be amazing.
Yeah. And so we have the people here to make it, to build it locally.
Right.
We have all the technology there. If people use things like the transit app, you can get around. There are successes and wins like that. I mean, if we could see more stuff like the FAST system,
right, I
feel like that would be an incremental thing that would make a lot of progress. But on the other side, and I have to bring it up, the Q line.
Right.
Everybody talks about the Q line. And somebody who runs around downtown a lot, I end up using the Woodward bus a lot.
Right. Yep,
instead of the Q line, because whenever it shows up, it shows up.
Right.
What are your feelings on that, and what could be done? And I mean, I personally have, heard of multiple plans to expand it, things like that. But I also kind of feel like it needs to be gotten right first. What are your thoughts on it? What could be done to, you looked at improving the bus shelters. What would you do to improve the Q line?
Right. I hate to knock any transit project, because I think that any transit project and any transit investment in Metro Detroit is a win. So I tentatively like the Q line. There's definitely things that, if I was, all powerful and in charge, I would have done a little bit differently. But I do like the Q line overall. I definitely think there are things that can be improved. Reliability is one thing. Sometimes the streetcars will come, 10 minutes apart, but sometimes it'll be 20 minutes. And then, if you're waiting, if you're on a schedule, it's a little bit frustrating. Another thing might be like the timings, like the schedule, like the scheduled arrivals. I found those to be relatively inaccurate. I do think it's difficult to track that properly because of traffic, and because, you never know if there's like an emergency vehicle on the tracks or if someone's parked on the tracks. And that kind of brings it back to the biggest thing, which is the decision to make the Q line curb running. So running on the sides of the street as opposed to the middle.
The mayor even said that if he were in office, he would not have allowed that.
Yeah, I think that just being on the curb is where everything happens. People are getting on and off. The bus is even on the curb. So if it was running in the middle of the street, I think it would be a little bit more reliable. And the biggest thing is the fact that we're not giving the Q line dedicated lanes. So if you look at, like any successful rail system, if you separate that rail from traffic, the train will come regularly, it'll be quicker, it'll just be a better overall experience. And that takes a lot of, political will because you're taking one lane each way away from drivers. But something like a mixed transit lane, so if they did the Q line and buses get its own lane, that would increase reliability on Woodward, for all modes of transit. So there are definitely ways to improve it. And I know they're working on a better arrival information system and things of that nature. And so overall, I would say I like the Q line. There's a couple things I wish they did a little bit differently. But overall, I'm not going to, knock any transit project. In terms of expansion, I think that any expansion should take into account, the major concerns that are with the current Q line. So there's been, I think, kind of pie in the sky talk about expanding it up Woodward to 8 Mile or expanding it along Jefferson.
Or Michigan.
Avenue, right, exactly. So if any of that, is going to happen, I think we need to sit down and have a conversation and see, what's gone well with the Q line currently and what can be done differently. So if we do something differently, I think dedicated lanes is the biggest thing. I mean, Detroit's roads are built, for a population of near 2 million. Because at our peak, we had 1.8 million people. And now we're down to about 650,000. So there's definitely a lot of room to have dedicated transit lanes or, increased numbers of bike lanes in the city without, causing massive traffic gridlock. Initially, if you, for example, on Jefferson, when they added the new bike lanes, I think initially there was a lot of backlash because it's it's going to double my commute time.
Well, and the mayor, and from a conversation we had with a few different officials, there was the talk that a lot of that backlash was from folks in the suburbs, like
exactly.
on Jefferson,
in Grosse Pointe.
From Grosse Pointe
right.
who had their commute lengthened because of it.
Yeah, lengthened by 5 minutes, if that. So it's not. I don't think that's an egregious issue, but I think that the bigger point is things like bike lanes and transit lanes and improved transit stops and bus shelters makes the experience for everyone better. It might inconvenience a motorist slightly. But, for the people riding on the sidewalk, for the people, who were riding on the sidewalk and now, using the bike lane, it just improves the experience. And, with the current traffic levels we have, we could probably stand to lose a few car lanes throughout the city, and it wouldn't really make a difference.
So you mentioned about not being all powerful.
Right, unfortunately.
I'm going to ask you, if you were all powerful, what's the first thing you would do to improve Detroit transit?
I think the first thing I would do, I'm going to cheat and say two things because I think there are two things that are really important, would be to implement dedicated transit lanes, especially along major corridors. So, for example, Grand River, Woodward, Jefferson, Gratiot.
So that existing buses would use those lanes.
Right. And for example, there's a route on Michigan that goes to the airport, the fast Michigan route. And I've used it a couple of times. It's worked well for me. It takes about an hour. But, if we had a dedicated lane, that hour-long trip could probably be whittled down to about 40 minutes. So that would just, once again, you don't want to wait an hour to get to your destination, right? But if it's 40 minutes, that might be something you can work with. So that would be one thing. And then tying directly to my research, I would make sure that we increase the number of bus shelters in the city currently. There is a plan to do that. The Detroit Strategic Plan for Transportation calls for adding 200 new and replacement bus shelters by 2021. So that is something that's in the works. But if I was all powerful, I would take that a little bit farther. Make sure that while we're waiting for the bus, that our experience is the best it can be. Because research out of the University of Minnesota has shown that, if you're waiting for the bus and you're waiting, exposed to the elements, you're just waiting, standing on the sidewalk with no bus shelter or no bench, a 5-minute wait feels like 8 minutes. So that, if you're waiting for that long, it's going to make you disgruntled and make you feel like the transit system isn't working for you. But if you're waiting for the bus at a stop with a shelter, with a place to sit, maybe with a charger, a 5-minute wait feels only like a 3-minute wait. So that, really goes to show that if we improve the experience at the bus stop, we can really improve the satisfaction people have with transit. Because, if you feel like you're only waiting 3 minutes, or if you feel like the bus is coming any second now, that will just, make you feel like the system is working for you.
Sarosh, thank you so much for stopping by the studio. Really interesting conversation. I'm glad we were able to get nerdy on transit. Where can people find you online?
Oh, you can find me on Twitter at Irani99Sarosh. I won't tweet that often, but maybe I'll start now if I get a bunch of new followers.
Detroit has had a wave of pizza places open across town, but one that hails from Chicago has bit the dust. Giordano's opened a couple years ago on Randolph, just off of Greektown. The 2-story restaurant and a former Bagger Dave's, and before that it was a barber shop, quietly closed over the weekend. Jer, it took a long time to get served there.
Yeah, Shai, more than an hour in my situation a few times. Although I feel bad for the people who work there, I never, ever want to see people lose their jobs. Let's be honest, I gave it a shot. I tried multiple things. Chicago-style pizza, to me, belongs in the trash bin. There's a lot of work being done on Belle Isle right now, and there is about to be even more at the Dossin Great Lakes Museum. On Monday, the Detroit Historical Society broke ground on the first phase of a $4.9 million outdoor enhancement project. There will be 4 phases, and it is expected to finish by 2021. This is the first time since the Maritime Museum opened back in 1960 that there's been work done to the outside space of the building. The Detroit Historical Society has raised $1.9 million to go toward the project and is still working to raise the remaining amount for the upgrades.
The first phase upgrades include a Lost Mariners Memorial with a garden, lights, and seating with an anchor from the Edmund Fitzgerald.
And I hear there's a river walk with an observation telescope going in.
There's going to be better signage, pedestrian lighting, bike racks, benches, a cycle service station, and a canine refresh station.
Well, you know me, yay bikes and dogs. And finally, I got to say that I'm pretty happy about this one, as although people might not believe it, I have kayaked before. There's going to be a soft launch shoreline right out front of the museum there, right into the Detroit River. It looks pretty great in the renderings. And of course, we will have all the renderings up on dailydetroit.com. Shai, do you know when this will get all done?
So the first phase is supposed to be done by November of 2019. A well-known goat around town has passed on. Cutie Pie, a therapy goat owned by Detroiter Eric Brown, was found dead. Cutie Pie had been reported missing last week. Cutie Pie and his buddy, Deer, that's another goat, could often be spotted around town. There's even a viral video of Brown and one of his goats on a city bus.
You know, Shai, I've seen them in different spots around town for sure. Always turning heads and always kind of brought a smile on my face.
Our condolences to Mr. Brown.
You know, this reminds me, and we're both former East Siders, this isn't my first run-in with Detroit and goats. When I was a kid, my grandmother would take me to a place called the Goat Yard. And that was a boat yard. I think it was near St. Jean over on the east side. The goat there, by the way, was named Nemo.
And we're done for today. Thanks for listening.
Did you know we have a membership program? It helps fund our original stories and programming. Because although we have some great advertisers and sponsors, doing more in-depth work requires more resources. And we're an independent operation without big pockets behind us. I mean, let's be honest, it's just us, Shai, and Sven, and the folks who help make this happen. So the more we raise, the more we can do. So consider becoming a member for just a few bucks a month at patreon.com/dailydetroit. With that, I'm Jer Stays.
And I'm Cheyenne Osirini. Take care of each other, and we'll see you around Detroit.
You're listening to the Podcast Detroit Network. Visit www.podcastdetroit.com for more information.